Jeez. Should take a lighting class or something. All right. There's not much truth and knowledge of human nature in this remark. I mean, there was. I'm off to a good start. There was much truth and knowledge of human nature in this remark. That's about being. I think it was about being upstaged by Johnson. But certainly one should think that in whatever elevated state of life a man who knew the value of the conversation of Johnson might be placed, though he might prudently avoid a situation in which he might appear lessened by comparison, yet he would frequently gratify himself in private with the participation of the rich intellectual entertainment which Johnson could furnish. Strange, however, it is to consider how few of the great sought his society, so that if one were disposed to take occasion for satire on that account, very conspicuous objects present themselves. His noble friend, Lord Ellenbach, well observed that if a great man procured an interview with Johnson, and did not wish to see him more, it showed a mere idle curiosity, and a wretched want of relish for extraordinary powers of mind. Mrs. Thrale justly and wittily accounted for such conduct by saying that Johnson's conversation was by much too strong for a person accustomed to obsequiousness and flattery. It was mustard in a young child's mouth. Mustard in a young child's mouth. One day, when I told him that I was a zealous Tory, but not enough according to knowledge, and should be obliged to him for a reason, he was so candid and expressed himself so well that I begged of him to repeat what he had said, and I wrote down as follows. Of Tory and Whig. A wise Tory and a wise Whig, I believe, will agree. Their principles are the same, though their modes of thinking are different. A high Tory makes government unintelligible. It is lost in the clouds. A violent Whig makes it impracticable. He is for allowing so much liberty to every man that there is not power enough to govern any man. The prejudice of the Tory is for establishment. The prejudice of the Whig is for innovation. A Tory does not wish to give more real power to government, but that government should have more reverence. Then they differ as to the church. The Tory is not for giving more legal power to the clergy, but wishes they should have a considerable influence founded on the opinions of mankind. The Whig is for eliminating and watching them with a narrow jealousy. Now a letter. To Mr. Perkins. Not Anthony Perkins, just Mr. Perkins. Sir, however often I have seen you, I have hitherto forgotten the note. But I have now seen it. Let me start this again. To Mr. Perkins. Sir, however often I have seen you, I have hitherto forgotten the note, but I have now sent it, with my good wishes for the prosperity of you and your partner, of whom, from our short conversation, I could not judge otherwise than favorably. I am, sir, your most humble servant, June 2nd, 1781, Sam Johnson. Footnote here about Mr. Perkins' partner being Mr. Barclay, a descendant of Robert Barclay of Uri, the celebrated apologist of the people called Quakers, and remarkable for maintaining the principles of his venerable progenitor with as much of the elegance of modern manners as is consistent with primitive simplicity. On Saturday, June 2nd, I set out for Scotland, and have promised to pay a visit in my way, as I sometimes did, at Southill, in Bedfordshire, at the hospitable mansion of Squire Dilly, the elder brother of my worthy friends, the booksellers in the Poultry. Dr. Johnson agreed to be of this party this year, with Mr. Charles Dilly and me, and to go and see Lord Bute's seat at Luton Hoe. He talked little to us in the carriage, being chiefly occupied in reading Dr. Watson's second volume of chemical essays, which he liked very well, and his own Prince of Abyssinia, on which he seemed to be intensely fixed, having told us that he had not looked at it since it was first published. I happened to take it out of my pocket this day, and he seized upon it with avidity. He pointed out to me the following remarkable passage. By what means, said the prince, are the Europeans thus powerful? Or why, since they can so easily visit Asia and Africa for trade or conquest, cannot the Asiatics and Africans invade their coasts, plant colonies in their ports, and give laws to their natural princes? The same wind that carries them back would bring us thither. They are more powerful, sir, than we, answered Imlac, because they are wiser. Knowledge will always predominate over ignorance, as man governs the other animals. But why their knowledge is more than ours, I know not. What reason can be given, but the unsearchable will of the Supreme Being. Johnson said, This, sir, no man can explain otherwise. A little problematic there, Johnson. Anyway, there's a footnote here about Dr. Watson's second volume of Chemicals Essays. It says, Dr. Watson is now the Bishop of Llandaff, one of the poorest bishoprics in the kingdom. That's the word, bishoprics. Just reading what it says here. Bishoprics? I don't know. How are you supposed to... I read it bishoprics. His lordship has written with much zeal to show the propriety of equalizing the revenues of bishops. He has informed us that he has burnt all his chemical papers. Kind of ironic. The friends of our excellent constitution, now assailed on every side by invaders and levelers, would have less regretted the suppression of some of his lordship's other writings. We stopped at Welwyn, where I wished much to see, in company with Dr. Johnson, the residence of the author of Night Thoughts, which was then possessed by his son, Mr. Young. Here some address was requisite, for I was not acquainted with Mr. Young, and had I proposed to Dr. Johnson that we should send to him, he would have checked my wish and perhaps been offended. I therefore concerted with Mr. Dilly that I should steal away from Dr. Johnson and him, and try what reception I could procure from Mr. Young. If unfavorable, nothing was to be said, but if agreeable, I should return and notify it to them. I hastened to Mr. Young's, found he was at home, sent in word that a gentleman desired to wait upon him, and was shown into a parlor where he and a young lady, his daughter, were sitting. Here appeared to be a plain, civil, country gentleman, and when I begged pardon for presuming to trouble him, but that I wished much to see his place, if he would give me leave, he behaved very courteously and answered, By all means, sir, we are just going to drink tea. Will you sit down? I thanked him, but said that Dr. Johnson had come with me from London, and I must return to the inn and drink tea with him, that my name was Boswell. I had traveled with him in the Hebrides. Sir, said he, I should think it a great honor to see Dr. Johnson here. Will you allow me to send for him? Availing myself of this opening, I said that I would go myself and bring him when he had drunk tea. He knew nothing of my calling here. Having been thus successful, I hastened back to the inn and informed Dr. Johnson that Mr. Young, son of Dr. Young, the author of Night Thoughts, whom I had just left, desired to have the honor of seeing him at the house where his father lived. Dr. Johnson luckily made no inquiry how this invitation had arisen, but agreed to go, and when we entered Mr. Young's parlor, he addressed him with a very polite bow. Sir, I had a curiosity to come and see this place. I had the honor to know that great man, your father. We went into the garden, where we found a gravel walk, on each side of which was a row of trees planted by Dr. Young, which formed a handsome Gothic arch. Dr. Johnson called it a fine grove. I beheld it with reverence. Well, that Boswell's awfully crafty sometimes. Sly guy. We sat some time in the summer house, on the outside wall of which was inscribed, Ambulantis in orto obiumbant vocum Dei. Oh, let me get this one. Okay, so ambulantis means walk. So horto, I guess, horticulture, so something about plants. I don't know what obiabant means, but vocum is probably the voice. Dei is God, so we have something like, you walk in the flowers. In the flowers you walk, you hear God, I'm guessing. Let's see what it actually says. They heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden. It was a little bit off. And that's from Genesis 3, Genesis chapter 3, section 8, I believe, or line 8. Well, okay, it was close, more or less. In reference to a brook by which it is situated, vivendi recte qui proroguat orum, and etc. I'm not going to try that one. That one means, he who keeps putting off the moment of reform is like the countryman waiting for the river to run by, but the river slides and rolls, and will slide and roll on to all time. It's from Horace's Epistles. I said to Mr. Young that I had been told his father was cheerful. Sir, said he. Hold on one second. Making a note. Okay. Sir, said he was too well-bred a man not to be cheerful in company, but he was gloomy when alone. He never was cheerful after my mother's death, and he had met with many disappointments. Dr. Johnson observed to me afterwards that this was no favorable account of Dr. Young, for it is not becoming in a man to have so little acquiescence in the ways of Providence as to be gloomy because he has not obtained as much preferment as he expected, nor to continue gloomy for the loss of his wife. Grief has its time. The last part of this censure was theoretically made. Practically, we know that grief for the loss of a wife may be continued very long, in proportion as affection has been sincere. No man knew this better than Dr. Johnson. We went into the church and looked at the monument erected by Mr. Young to his father, who was Dr. Young. Mr. Young mentioned an anecdote that his father had received several £1,000s of subscription money for his Universal Passion, but had lost it in the South Sea. This assertion is disproved by a comparison of notes, says an editor later. The first 4 satires of Young were published in 1725. The South Sea Scheme, which appears to be meant here, was in 1720. Okay, Mr. Editor, ruin the fun. Dr. Johnson thought this must be a mistake. Oh, Dr. Johnson agrees with this, later editor, for he had never seen a subscription book. Upon the road, we talked of the uncertainty of profit with which authors and booksellers engage in the publication of literary works. Johnson said, "My judgment, I have found, is no certain rule as to the sale of a book." I said, "Pray, sir, have you been much plagued with authors sending you their works to revise?" Johnson answered, "No, sir, I have been thought a sour, surly fellow." I said, "Very lucky for you, sir, in that respect." I could have read that funnier, but you get the idea. I must, however, observe that notwithstanding what he now said, which he no doubt imagined at the time to be the fact, there was, perhaps, no man who more frequently yielded to the solicitations, even of very obscure authors, to read their manuscripts, or more liberally assisted them with advice and correction. According to what I've seen in this book so far, that's very true. Johnson found himself very happy at Squire Dilly's, where there is always abundance of excellent fare and hearty welcome. And they take American Express. On Sunday, June 3rd, we all went to South Hill Church, which is very near to Mr. Dilly's house. It being the first Sunday of the month, the Holy Sacrament was administered, and I stayed to partake of it. When I came afterwards into Dr. Johnson's room, he said, "You did right to stay and receive the communion. I had not thought of it." This seemed to imply that he did not choose to approach the altar without a previous preparation, as to which good men entertain different opinions, some holding that it is irreverent to partake of that ordinance without considerable premeditation. Others, that whoever is a sincere Christian and in a proper frame of mind to discharge any other ritual duty of our religion may, without scruple, discharge this most solemn one. A middle notion I believe to be the just one, which is that applicants need not think a long train of preparatory forms indispensably necessary, but neither should they rashly and lightly venture upon so awful and mysterious an institution. Christians must judge each for himself what degree of retirement and self examination is necessary upon each occasion. Being in a frame of mind which I hope for the felicity of human nature many experience, in fine weather, at the county house of a friend, consoled and elevated by pious exercises, I express myself in an unrestrained fervor to my guide, philosopher, and friend. My dear sir, I would fain be a good man, and I am very good now. I think this is Johnson speaking. I fear God and honor the king. I wish to do no ill, and to be benevolent to all mankind. He looked at me with a benignant indulgence, but took occasion to give me wise and salutary caution. Do not, sir, accustom yourself to trust to impressions. There is a middle state of mind between conviction and hypocrisy, of which many are conscious. By trusting to impressions, a man may gradually come to yield to them, and at length be subject to them, so as not to be a free agent, or what is the same thing in effect, to suppose that he is not a free agent. A man who is in that state should not be suffered to live. If he declares he cannot help acting in a particular way, and is irresistibly impelled, there can be no confidence in him, no more than in a tiger. But, sir, no man believes himself to be impelled irresistibly. We know that he who says he believes it lies. Favorable impressions at particular moments, as to the state of our souls, may be deceitful and dangerous. In general, no man can be sure of his acceptance with God. Some, indeed, may have had it revealed to them. St. Paul, who wrought miracles, may have had a miracle wrought on himself, and may have obtained supernatural assurance of pardon and mercy and beatitude. Yet St. Paul, though he expressed strong hope, also expressed fear, lest having preached to others, he himself should be a castaway. I was wrong up there. That part where it goes, my dear sir, I would fain to be a good man, and I am very good now. I fear God and honor of the king. I wish to do no ill, and I to be benevolent to all mankind. That was actually Boswell speaking there. And then the rebuttal was Johnson, of course, starting with, do not, sir, accustom yourself to trust to impressions. Anyway, the opinion of a learned bishop, Dr. Barnard, Bishop of Killaloe, of our acquaintance, as to there being merit in religious faith being mentioned, Johnson answered, why, yes, sir, the most licentious man, were hell open before him, would not take the most beautiful strumpet to his arms. We must, as the apostle says, live by faith, not by sight. I talked to him of original sin in consequence of the fall of man and of the atonement made by our Savior. There's a quote here from, there's a footnote here about the original sin that says, Dr. Ogden, in his second sermon on the articles of the Christian faith, with admirable acuteness, thus addressed the opposers of the doctrine, which accounts for the confusion, sin, and misery which we find in this life. Quoting, it would be severe in God, you think, to degrade us to such a sad state as this for the offense of our first parents, but you couldn't allow him to place us in it without any inducement. Are our calamities lessened for not having or for not being ascribed to Adam? If your condition be unhappy, is it not still unhappy, whatever was the occasion? With the aggravation of this reflection, that if it was as good as it was at first design, there seems to be somewhat the less reason to look for its amendment. Anyway, after some conversation, which Johnson desired me to remember, He, at my request, dictated to me as follows. Ooh, and this is a long section, so I think we'll wait till tomorrow to get into Johnson talking original sin. Sounds like a hot topic for him. So until next time, bye from Boswell.